Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition. We're broadcasting one day post Memorial Day, and we want to wish our best to all the families of soldiers who could not be with us, on this particular day. And what an appropriate day to welcome back Tom Amenta, veteran. Tom, happy to have you on the show today. We got a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do. Always happy to be here, Mark.
Hey, listen, the hot topic of the day is, what is going to happen with the bill? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's being called the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Tom, I think when you and I were talking pre-show, when the far right and the far left are both trashing the bill, you as a centrist have got to be feeling pretty good about this, but there is a lot of good, bad, and ugly in this bill.
Yeah. So first of all, the fact that the far right was really prepared to play a true brinksmanship game that would have just wrecked the American economy. Honestly, I'm flummoxed. You and I are both in absolute agreement. This country spends too much money. Let's just start there, so the viewers understand. Like, I am not proposing that $4 trillion of increase is necessarily a good thing. But when you see, the Progressive Caucus screaming that it strips away too many protections, and you see the far right, the Freedom Caucus, screaming that it doesn't do enough to rein in the debt, it's at least a solid first step towards something. And the fact that it could get done, and the fact that, frankly, I love the fact that Biden and Jeffries and Schumer have to whip the votes. I really do. And I love that McCarthy's got to do it. McConnell generally has the Senate for the Republicans together in a very different way. He's sort of unique in his ability and his power there. But the fact that they're going to have to work the phones, they're going to actually have to do that, that's what American politics is supposed to be. You're never supposed to get everything that you want. We are literally designed to be like that. So, and I know we'll unpack some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, for the most part, I think you and I are going to end up agreeing on most of that. But just in the net, okay, so we can destroy the strongest economy in the world over brinksmanship stupidity, or we can agree that no one got everything that they wanted, take another step, and continue to march down the road towards progress. And I'm all for that.
Well, some things in the bill that, frankly, that I like are some of the spending caps and the clawbacks. And the clawbacks are the easy part, taking back unspent money. The stuff with the IRS is basically a one-year delay. Having student loan payments start again, that's a good thing. We're not in a COVID crisis anymore.
Right.
The caps on discretionary spending, the fact that military spending is going to get equal to what it is right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are some positive things. The work requirements, okay, great. That's been a long-standing goal forever.
Yeah. It's
going to have a negligible effect. But the only thing not the only, but when I say the ugly part of it, given a $4 trillion increase in the credit card balance past the 2024 election, where'd that come out of? I thought we were going to be talking about a $2 trillion increase. I guess they just, I'm thinking now, trying to put a Democratic hat on. I guess they're thinking, okay, if we're giving up this, we want to have this increase in anticipation that we're going to win in 2024, and we don't want to have to deal with this until after the election.
I actually think that was more of a Republican thing. I think that was McCarthy. Yeah, I think that was McCarthy being a little savvier, because it's got to get raised at some point, period. No matter what anyone said, unless you're Chip Roy and you're nuts, all respect to the congressman, he's crazy if he was really, truly willing to, as he said, to crash the American economy. That's a bridge too far for anything. But if you've got to do it, and you really think your horse is going to win in 2024, which, the Republicans feel say what you want about Trump, but they're feeling pretty confident about it, right? Why not? If you got to do it, why not put yourself in a position for either one, you get to fight the fight for an entire 4-year term on a lame duck president in Biden, which always goes well, especially when you just grind on them into that next midterm. Or your people are in the White House. You fixed your mistakes from the last election in 2022. Maybe keep the House, maybe even swing the Senate, which the Senate map is not favorable to the Democrats this year, or in this next election cycle. And suddenly you're in a position to really rip it down closer to where you are. And I think that, I don't know, I've not heard anything on who quote unquote gave on that, but I think there's an equally plausible case that McCarthy and his negotiators were like, look, we know this is going up. At the end of the day, this has to. So how do we do it where we best position ourselves to walk back everything that we don't like in this compromise, as opposed to fighting over, like, here's a great example, or I think you can get the analogy here. When I worked for myself, we always had to deal with intellectual property. And one of the things in intellectual property law, and anything, if you're going to sign an agreement, it used to say, on Earth, and then it was in the solar system. And now these things say in the known universe. The person has the right to all of that IP, because someday maybe we go wherever. So me and my former business partner, one of our favorite strategies to see how in good faith the negotiator was going to negotiate with us is the very first thing that we would disagree on would be, okay, well, we see this, in perpetuity in the known universe. And look, we get it, guys, but we would really like to carve out the Andromeda Galaxy and the Horsehead Crab Nebula. And we learned instantly where the other side was, because they were either like, oh yeah, they're like laughing and giggling and like, yeah, sure, we'll strike that out. Or they get super aggressive and like, well, why do you want that? Well, if you get super aggressive over maybe the dumbest ask in the history of contract negotiations, you're not here in good faith. You're just here to grind me down. You're just here to, like, you think you can take advantage of me. But if you're chuckling about it and you're like, okay, great. Like, at least we know that when we get to the other points, they're coming at it from a good place, right? So I think there's a certain level of them realizing, like, okay, well, the debt going up is the known universe here. So how do we get that to be the thing that they fight for really hard? And then once they've committed to, that, once we've quote unquote buckled, here's where we start going after some of the things, because that snap was not expected really to get where it got. And the Progressive Caucus is screaming about it. Well, I agree with you, it's negligible, but at the same time, like, that was not really what was expected to come out of this. That was one that was expected to die.
Well, let me counter one thing you said there. Let me defend Chip Roy, because a lot of guys in the Freedom Caucus have these core beliefs, and they stick to them, that the government is spending too much money. And I have to take the other side of the trade when I hear everybody, oh, it would have crashed the economy. Oh, default, it's horrible, we're doing it. No, that's not true. The government has taken in more money now than ever in the history of the republic. Interest on the debt would have statutorily been mandated to be paid. Yes, could some other things have been deferred? Yes, that's probably what would have happened. Eventually, we were going to get around to getting a deal. Now, again, we don't have a certainty that this thing's going to pass right now, or pass in time for the, quote, Janet Yellen June 5th deadline, which was moved back from June 1st and could probably be moved back another 4 or 5 days. I don't know. But I don't ever criticize someone for their core belief. And I don't think for a minute these guys, look, Jim Jordan in the Freedom Caucus is supporting this bill. Okay.
Yep.
And certain people, you have to respect, their opinion. A lot of people feel, hey, we gave too much. But you know what? We had two solid Republican negotiators in the room, and these guys are sharp as a tack. I watched them.
Yep.
Well, I'm not going to criticize the negotiators. I think at the end of the day, and I told you this pre-show, if I'm a member of Congress, I'm not happy about a lot of aspects of this bill, but I still vote affirmatively for it. Right. If I was in Congress, that's what I would be doing. So,
well, that's the, like I equally, the Progressive Caucus and the far right of the Freedom Caucus, because you're right, there's a lot of support inside of that in the begrudging manner by which you also would vote. There comes a point when you're so far away from something, because one of the things that you said when you're talking about the default and everything is that eventually the ship would right. The problem with that eventually, and this is what I think Chip Roy's losing sight of, and the far right of the Freedom Caucus is losing sight of, is how many middle to lower class income Americans, especially retirees, are going to get just brutalized by that middle ground of eventually. You're right. The markets would rebound. Like, I'm not worried about my 401k. I'm 42 years old, but my parents who are retired, what this would have done to them, and how this would have impacted their futures and millions of Americans. It's like, look, I think that it is a good thing that he has the principle. I think that it is a good thing that he's willing to continue to sort of, raise the flag and rattle the saber and yell about this and point out the simple truth that America is spending too much money. I'm here for all of that. But there comes a point where you've got to understand what this would do And just because it's going to eventually, the ship's going to eventually right itself. And look, you're way more astute in finance than I am. You're a finance guy, right? Like I'm a business guy, and those are two very different things. But what I know for sure is that if he got his way, and it really did do that, the millions upon tens of millions of Americans that would have been so adversely harmed and impacted by something like this. Like, again, sometimes you got to hold your nose and understand the entire American system is built on compromising. You are never in American politics. And I mean never. And that's a big word. Right. I know beggar's a big word.
Yeah.
Right. And that is exactly how Madison set the Constitution up. I get it. Never's a big word. But you are really never supposed to get everything you want unless you somehow have the president and both houses of Congress at such a supermajority that the United States of America has done it with the most important thing we have, our vote, to say we mandate your idea of what America could look like. And if America hasn't done that, then you got to meet at some point in the middle. That is just how our system is designed. And it's like, if you're not willing to at least acknowledge that, the basic structure, the basic framework of American government, like that's sort of the problem I have. And I have that with the Progressive Caucus too. Don't get me wrong. It's just when Roy's like, I'm going to do every procedural thing I can to slow this down. It's like, bro, like at some point, vote no, fine. Vote no. I am not saying don't betray your principles. I am saying don't be the jerk in the room just because of that principle.
Well, let's put our prediction hats on. Do you think it passes the House?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's gonna pass because what Hakeem Jeffries is gonna do on the left is he's going to tell the Progressive Caucus not to vote for it. He's gonna tell the Democratic moderates like Jason Crow in Colorado or Seth Moulton in Massachusetts and all these other people that he knows that will survive the vote, and he'll be like, yo, don't let the knuckleheads on the other side screw this up because we're going to be blamed for it too. So it's going to get the 218. It's going to be bipartisan. Both sides are going to claim victory on it. As a matter of fact, I don't think Jeffries and McCarthy are like as buddy as the way that some House speakers and minority leaders have been in the past, which I don't think a lot of Americans understand. But I do think that the two of them at some point have had the call like, all right, so 20 of mine drop and 30 of yours drop and we just get in the middle, right? Like, I think that's how the whip's going to go.
I concur with you. Now, the Senate's a different angle. Schumer's going to have to pull through in the Senate. He likely will, but he's got to get 60 votes.
Yep.
I'm not as confident in the Senate as I am in the House, but we're going to see how it plays out. Tom,
I'm actually more confident in the Senate because McConnell is not going to McConnell has already said this is passing.
That's a good point.
Like Schumer can lose half of his base if he wants to. McConnell is going to get, everyone to the table, but maybe.
So it probably passes. It probably passes in the Senate 61-39.
Like Lindsey Graham's going to raise hell. Thune's going to raise hell. Like you can see it, but like McConnell is going to let 3 or 4 people defect in order to save their pride and save their face as they need to. But he's going to have the rest of those ladies and gentlemen lining up for the affirmative quickly. He's already said he's going to do that, and he has that power.
He does have that power. All right, let's talk about the implications. Let's make the assumption it passes. Look, Tom, we're still going to be running on paper $1.5 trillion deficit. Yep. That is unsustainable. And you have situations now where countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia, they're looking at situations of replacing the dollar. Look, Tom, you and I know if the dollar is replaced as the backbone currency, the currency of record, if you will, this lifestyle that Americans lead, where we get to spend $1.5 trillion in excess of what we take in, that's going to end quickly.
Agreed. Well, let's take the Russians off the table because they're Russia right now, and they don't really matter. And let's also, I think it's fair to say, let's take the Saudis off because they have a very vested interest in changing the currency of Brent crude because that means a ridiculous profitability delta to them. I don't think they're concerned about the debt. I think they're seeing an opportunity. But I think that Brazil and India are really fair points, and I think it's a really astute observation because those are the emerging markets. Right. And honestly, what I tell everyone, it's like if you want to look at countries that are more applicable as equals to America, those are the 2 countries I always go to because they have high populations, they're extremely diverse, they have economies that are rapidly growing that sort of do look at what a younger United States of America was back in the day. And I agree. Like if Brazil and India make that decision, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem fast. China will never do it because they have purposely intertwined their economy so much with ours. The EU doesn't have a vested interest in doing it. The UK never will because the British pound is still the pound sterling, right? I mean, they did almost everything they could to crash that last year, and it still came out. So, but no, I think that's a really astute observation. And again, we talked about this pre-show, and I'll say it. I do not agree with spending $4 trillion at a 1.5 deficit year over year. That is unsustainable. I completely agree. And more cuts need to happen. I also am one of those people that I think our tax base needs to go up. Like, I'm sorry, that's just too big of a delta. And when you look at the Reagan, the last great American tax plan was the Reagan plan that Baker put through. And you look at the levels that Jimmy Baker got ultimately, and you look at where they are right now, there's a level of dishonesty on both sides. I can't emphasize enough, both sides of the aisle of what the American tax structure really was supposed to look like and what Reaganomics was really supposed to be. So, that's probably its own show in itself. But,
we could talk about
I think
that.
both have to happen.
Hey, listen, inflation rate, okay, assuming we get this bill through Congress, assuming the dollar is still the reserve currency of the world, which I think for the short term, that will be the case.
I agree.
We're still running 4.5% inflation, Tom. I mean, the Fed is likely, the markets are now pricing in another 25 basis point increase at the June or July meeting. And the people I think that thought, well, we're done, these economic numbers that are coming out, the confidence index, unemployment still staying 3.5%. In Florida, Florida's 2.8% unemployment. Tom, these are not recession numbers by any stretch of the imagination. Stock market's rebounding. NVIDIA hits $1 trillion valuation today.
Yeah.
Look, my gut feeling tells me the Fed will increase again. Now, mortgage rates are at 7% right now. That is problematic because now there's a shortage of houses out there because people that already have a house. Look, if you have a 3 to 4% interest rate on the mortgage in your house, man, you've really got to want to move someplace to go out and take
Mark, my loan just cleared to close Friday. For my the next time that I'm on with you, it'll be in a totally different venue because I'll moved into my new place that I bought. To your point, my rate as a veteran, okay, so for those who don't know, VA loans are typically about a half point under whatever the national average is. Right. My rate is 6.25%. And that was a good rate. Okay. Also, the reason that I was able to get my place and the reason that all happened was because the person that had owned the condo that I'm moving into had been renting it, decided they no longer wanted to be a landlord and put their secondary property on the market. To them, the material impact going one way or the other didn't matter. It was all about putting the money to work in a different space because they found retail too complicated. That's and that is up and down all over the market. Right. Like going to look at places, and I live in Chicago. Okay, like there's always a different supply and demand, and they were like, nope, this is not how this rolls. So I mean, yeah, it's crazy. And to go back to everything else, like I don't think we've ever seen an economy like this ever. No, and I think that, and I think that that's one of those things. Like and this is where my business guy hat fails the finance person hat, and I looked to my other friends. One of my friends is graduated with a PhD in economics from London School of Economics. Like I was actually asking him about it, and he's very conservative, and his thing was, well, we can't go up much more because the first wave of banks that left, all they really showed was that they had over portfolio debt. And with the inflation, it wasn't tenable. He goes, but it's not going to take much more before healthy portfolios start trying to offload that. You're going to have sort of he didn't call it a run. I forgot what he said, but it's like, it's going to get even worse. At the same time, people are still working. People still want to buy consumer goods. Nike is not squawking at all. Like the only reason Adidas is about to take the massive loss that they are is because they partner with Kanye West. You're seeing luxury goods at a higher demand than you ever have before. One of the 1 trillion is the Louis Vuitton, Moët Hennessy company, LVMH. Like it's not slowing down. And honestly, I think the Fed needs to be a little more open to maybe trying something else. But at the same time, man, I appreciate they at least are willing to continue to have the courage to recognize that this is not the right way and continue to try and do something.
4.5% inflation is not sustainable over the long run. It'll wreck an economy. So, like the old commercial, pay me now or pay me later. Look, there is going to be some pain in certain segments of the marketplace. Office buildings in San Francisco, New York, I could go on and on. Certain pockets of real estate around the country. But, having traveled through virtually the entire state of Florida over the past 30 days, that state is booming. And it's, when you have 800 people a day moving into the state, I mean, I'm seeing new developments going up. I'm saying they're priced at what? And they're selling. I mean, so it is not even across the country. Now,
correct.
Certain states, Texas, Florida, certain parts of Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, doing very well. Others not so much. So it's going to be somewhat uneven. But one thing for sure, Tom, these prices on real estate are not coming down to the degree a lot of people thought. And that's because there's simply not enough sellers because they've locked in these low rates. So
correct.
Let me move off of the economy for a minute here. I want to talk about some international pieces because this is really your area of expertise. What did you make of China rebuking the Biden administration's request to have a meeting of top military leaders?
I think that China's in a very interesting position right now. They're supporting the Russians, but not too much. They have reached out with overtures to the Ukraine, and Zelensky has, I wouldn't say warmly received them, but he has received them, which is a difference. I really think that China is trying to paint itself as the new world negotiator, if you will, not the world police officer, which is what the United States is sometimes seen, but like the world deal broker, right? Okay, we've got a problem. We're going to come in and we're going to use our geopolitical influence and we're going to use our status as the second, largest economy in the world and things like that. So I think that there's a signal there of them believing that they are continuing to amass a serious amount of clout, that it's no longer necessary to always play nice in the sandbox, that they can push back at small things, which, say what you want, this is a relatively small thing. And two, I think it also gives them distance away. So when they once again both go to the Russians and the Ukrainians to try and get that peace broker, they're like, look, we won't talk military with the United States. Like, no, we are here to find peaceful solutions. America is just fighting a proxy war through the Ukraine, and they can't be trusted as honest partners in here, which of course, Putin's going to lap up like a cat laps up milk from a saucer, right? Like, I mean, that's going to be one more push for him to try and get his people to the table. So I see it more in that frame and in that idea where they know they can buck it a little bit, and it puts them in a better position for what they ultimately want. And that's to be more of the deal broker in the world now.
Well, Taiwan may have a little bit to do with it too, and some of the recent positioning on that. Yeah. What did you make of the fact that Ukrainian drones are now striking Moscow after Moscow hit Kiev?
I think that is honestly a pretty dangerous tit for tat. But I also believe that Putin said a lot, and he's made a lot of claims for a very long time, and I think that there's a certain intelligence purely from a military strategy to say, oh, you think you're safe? Hold my beer, watch this, right? They're not going to do a lot of damage. They're not going to be effective in a very real sort of military way. But from a strategic standpoint, from a we can get into you, from a like there's no place that you can't be touched, from a scaring the Muscovites like it has, right?
Yes.
There's currency, there's value there. That's a shaping the battlefield type technique. And I think there's also a little bit of brinksmanship to it, but because we really don't want. But as long as they're not using American equipment, and as long as we can prove that, then ultimately you got to fight the war. You got to fight if you're the Ukraine. And I think that there is certainly a level of battlefield shaping, increasing fear. It's a viable target for them as far as they're concerned. Like, I don't have a problem with it from a military standpoint or a Geneva Convention of, oh, you're doing the wrong thing. I just think it's way more of a psychological operation than it is anything else.
Yeah. Well, as you said, in war, they have to fight back. Okay.
Right.
And the battle's in Ukraine. So, I mean, look, I've got no issue with it. All right. Let's shift the politics a little bit. DeSantis got in the race. Tim Scott got in the race. Gloves have come off DeSantis attacking Trump, Trump attacking DeSantis.
Yep.
DeSantis' campaign appears to be one where he is focusing on Iowa, New Hampshire, the early states. South Carolina is going to go to Tim Scott or Nikki Haley.
Right.
But focusing on those two states, again, Trump is ahead nationally. Even in Iowa, Trump's up 47-25 over DeSantis. That's to be expected.
Yep.
But you and I both know Iowa is about retail politicking.
Oh, yeah.
It really is. And,
oh, yeah.
And same thing with New Hampshire. So DeSantis has a war chest of $200 million. Okay. So, Trump's not lacking for money either. So sort of this battle appears to have been joined here, but I'm not really counting anyone out because, Tom, it is still so early.
Yeah, I always hate Iowa, if I'm going to be honest. I mean, especially for the Republican side of the ticket, right? I mean, it's just such a sort of myopic place. Like you go, and I mean, again, I live in Illinois. I've been to Iowa many times. I've traveled back and forth. I did the show once from when I was in Iowa, right? Remember that? Yes. So I'm really familiar with it. And that state, east to west, north to south, is very, very similar. Like even in the major suburban or in the major population centers, you still have a very agrarian focused, very, heavy, very conservative base. I think that it is going to be an excellent bellwether for the far right. I think we're going to find out just how strong Trump is in the face of someone who is actively, aggressively pandering to that far right, MAGA crowd in DeSantis. I think that you're going to sort of see where that is shaping. I think that Iowa will be a good sort of bellwether for that. But anything that's, I don't know, anything but the far three clicks to the right, like I just think that you're going to get that sort of, like you said, retail politics to it. I don't think that you're going to see a ton. I think New Hampshire is going to be where I start paying attention a little more because there's a lot more moderate Republicans there. There's a lot more diverse thought. There's certainly plenty MAGAs, but it's much more indicative of what your average state.
New Hampshire traditionally has been a better barometer of who the ultimate nomination would be than Iowa because we have at this point the last three winners of the Iowa caucus have not gone on to win the nomination. Right. So, but look, I don't criticize DeSantis' strategy, nor would I criticize Trump. I mean, Trump's a former president. DeSantis is a formidable challenger. He's been governor of my state. He's won by 19 points, transformed a leaning red state to a solid red state. A lot of people like him, and so listen. But those two aren't the only ones. Tim Scott has a solid following. Mike Pence may get in. This thing's going to change. We'll have debates.
Oh yeah.
But look, I think it is fair to say Donald Trump is the front runner. Anyone that does not say that, I think they're not being honest with their audience.
Well, no, I agree, and honestly, and look, I am well documented on how I feel about Trump. So this is allow the centrist in me to say it scares the tar out of me. Like there are things that. What I used to like about DeSantis, or I used to be like, okay, like the farther he tries to court that, because it's very clear his strategy is slice off enough Trump. And because what you learned with Trump was the more moderate Republicans, generally speaking, will hold their nose and vote party lines. Like you've really got to be me where you're deep purple before you're like, where you're trying to figure out which way you're going to hold your nose, right? So, and look, it was a viable strategy for Trump. It was almost, in 2016, it was almost a viable strategy in 2020. It's very clear that that's DeSantis' strategy. So listening to some of the things that he says, I'm like, man, dude, come on. Like, that's just me personally. I think that there's room in, to be a little farther to the center, like I said, just past that 3. And that's where I think everyone's going to fight. And Trump also has and Trump has a very serious legal problem at this point. Like, ladies and gentlemen, I know there's so many conspiracy theories. I know some people like if you can't see what Jack Smith is doing to him, like Jack Smith got Evan Cochran's notes, his notes from a private conversation about the documentation at Mar-a-Lago, all right, which is normally attorney-client privilege. That is an unprecedented step for a federal judge to take. That if you don't that is such an alarm bell. That is such a bright red flashing light to say that there is a problem here. Okay, I know. So you've got to take that seriously. Yeah. I in New York, I thought there was a little gamesmanship. It's still a really flimsy legal strategy of being able to use a federal law as like your +1 to go from a misdemeanor to a felony on a state charge. They did it. They frankly own them dead to rights on the misdemeanors.
Let me share this with you, Tom. Assuming everything you just said is correct, I'm going to tell you what the reaction is going to be, because I have been around a lot of fervent Donald Trump supporters, and the response is going to be the deep state is trying to take him out. That can assure you that is going to be house sinker. And when Trump faced Alvin Bragg in New York, his numbers went up because people perceive him fighting. Now, depending upon what happens with the Mar-a-Lago case, depending on what happens with the Atlanta case, these things have a way that they are going to affect the race. But I do know this, and if I was advising the DeSantis campaign, I know they have to try to peel off some Trump voters, but having been around many, very few Trump voters are going to abandon him for anything. And folks, that's sort of like, as Rush Limbaugh used to say, this is realville. Okay, we have a primary, we're going to have debates, we're going to have policy positions. There will be some shifting around, okay? And again, national polls mean nothing because these are all state elections here. But I'm just preparing people for the fact that particularly people in the national media are going to say, well, DeSantis, he can't compete. Or those that say, look, Trump shouldn't do this. Trump has an extremely loyal base. They really, as Trump said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, and again, we're not going to that extreme, but figuratively speaking, only his base is solid. So but it's not a majority. Okay, so
but Mark, that's what worries me about, and that's why frankly I'm so disappointed in DeSantis. It's like how I don't understand on some levels of strategy trying to peel those people off. I don't understand because I agree with you. They are that loyal to him. They are like, he is a cult of personality, and that's what's being followed. It's like, I'm looking for the candidate, like Tim Scott has a little bit of a signal that he might move a little farther, more towards the center, like, and give up sort of like that Trump vote and trying to collect as many, what I call traditional Republicans as he possibly can, small government, fiscally responsible, high defense. He sort of signaled he's going to play it that way. Nikki Haley's going to play it that way. I think Mike Pence is going to if he does jump into the election, he'll do whatever he thinks he can do just to screw Donald Trump up. Like, I don't think Pence thinks he's going to win. I think he just wants to stick it to his old boss, which, hey, if literally there's audio that your old boss was like, sure, maybe he needs to hang. I mean, I can see that. I can't really blame the dude for it.
We're going to stay on top of it, okay, for sure. And folks, as we always say, we're going to cut through the propaganda, which is what we're trying to sort of get today. One final thought on the election. I want to move on to a couple closing topics. AI, Tom. There's already a large group of the American population that doesn't feel elections are fair. What's the potential AI risk here of, what's real news from fake news? And I think you know where I'm coming with this.
Yeah. So first of all, for the people that my day job is in technology. Okay. I'm not going to, I work for a very, very large tech company. I'm not going to put that out in the ether for a couple of obvious reasons, but we use AI. We have AI modeling, all of that. And I also previously worked at Google, where I actually got to talk to their AI specialist when I was there in 2019. Okay. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I'm not, but I certainly have a little bit of a background in this. I think where I'm concerned the most about AI and the things like ChatGPT and those is what I'm worried about is how easy it becomes for a massive amount of propaganda to be disseminated and just flood spaces like social media, where what scares me is pairing my abilities as marketer and someone who's a first wave social media influencer and user of that when I was working for myself in e-commerce, back starting in 2008. To see how easy it is to construct narratives that are AI assisted. And if you know how to get them to spread and get them to push, and that's what worries me, is that how easy the volume of misinformation can rise and how much the misinformation can increase. Because at the end of the day, everyone was worried about voting machines and stuff. They're actually very, very concerned, and they're all air gapped. Okay. It's not like, it's not like that's on the Wi-Fi where somehow Skynet can sneak into it or something like this and harm the election. That's not how voting machines work, right? I think that so that I'm not worried about. I'm not really worried about AI I'm a little worried about AI maybe in how you target voters, right? Like that's going to be a huge, that and machine learning, like getting to really, really niche subsections of knowing how to just dominate. Again, pairing that with social media, pairing that with your ad spends. So that's really where I see AI as the frontier. And ultimately, like you say, cut through the propaganda. What worries me is if you flood the zone, so to speak, with a very specific, highly targeted message that is done with a very intentional, deep research, you might get that group to believe a lie. And if you get them to believe the lie and you can't get them off it, you know, like
prior to AI, Russian collusion.
Right.
I mean, that's my concern. So
yeah, but now you're going to be able to see that 10, 100, maybe even I know this is a big number, maybe 1,000 times X. And if you're like, Tom, you're overreacting.
No, you're not.
NVIDIA is a $1 trillion company inside of a week, 1 week. It's what, 34% market cap growth now? Why? Because they are the chip producer for all the AI technology in the world. That's why they are a $1 trillion company.
Right. All right. I want to close it out. And this is, again, not the greatest thing, but it's consistent. Tom, you're in Chicago. I mean, 11 killed, 45 wounded. It's like, Chirac. Is it as bad locally as it's perceived nationally?
So the biggest number about Chicago, and I'll even take a step back. Like I'm moving from a suburb, I'm moving into the city proper here in about 3 weeks. So one of the first things that I did, me and one of my very good friends, like we got our concealed carry, right? Okay. Because I should have done it earlier. I'm not taking that chance, right? So I'm also, this is what I say, if you want your concealed carry and you do not A, regularly shoot, and B, you are not, competent with the tool, please don't carry a gun. You don't belong. You don't deserve one. Yeah. Training matters way more than the physical implement. Right. That was my PSA. What it really is especially now that like the riot, the George Floyd stuff and the COVID restrictions have been relaxed, like a lot of that breaking into the Mag Mile and all that other stuff, that's really gone away. And there's always been pockets based on the way that Chicago was set up. Okay. Like how neighborhoods were developed and things like that. There are always neighborhoods in like Inglewood on the west side, for example, is one that's always notorious that are truly problematic, right? And they always have been. But where I'm going to live in Lakeview, right? I'm like a 15-minute walk from Wrigley Field, for example, or where one of my friends lives in the West Loop, or another friend that I have in Lincoln Park, or Wicker Park, or Logan Square, for example. These are all neighborhoods that are high traffic, a lot of, going out, a lot of the economic engine of the city. And they're really safe. They're no more less safe than, say, uptown in Manhattan, for example, or things like that. Like, yeah, something happens every now and then, but if you start getting into those neighborhoods that are the quote unquote bad neighborhoods, they're just so much worse than in other areas of the country that also have their quote unquote bad neighborhoods. So Chicago's just way more polarized as a city in those aspects, in those areas, than a lot of other places in the country. And it's really easy for it to make headlines. And every now and then it bleeds over into those other neighborhoods that wouldn't expect it. Sure, absolutely. For example, the uptown neighborhood, there's some really great pockets and there's some really kind of sketchy pockets. So you just kind of got to know.
A good buddy of mine many years ago, he was attacked in a ritzy type place by gang people, and they left him for dead.
Hyde Park.
Yeah, I won't get into specific, but he,
it's just because it's South Side and it's Hyde Park's great, Bronzeville's okay, but around that, you know what I'm saying, isn't always the best neighborhood.
It's not isolated to Chicago. I mean, in San Francisco now, merchants are closing everywhere because the crime's out of control. People have to put stickers. I was talking to someone yesterday. He said, "Well, we had to put stickers on our car. Please do not steal our car." I'm going, "Did it work?" And they go, "Yeah, it didn't work."
Really?
Oh yeah, it worked. And then down in my neck of the woods at Hollywood Beach, Florida, there were 9 people, no one killed, 9 people shot. There was a shootout on the beach, and 9 people. So
yeah, I saw that this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the song says, it goes on and on and on, and it doesn't end. But anyhow, you're going to be moving in a couple weeks, so I'm looking forward to catching your new digs. And
yeah, man.
Yeah, this is going to be good stuff, Tom. So again, good perspective, wide variety of topics today, folks. Everything, budgets, inflation, local stuff, shootings, Iraq, Russia, China. We cover it all, folks. So anyhow, Tom, thanks for joining me again today. Great insights as always. Got to hit the road now. We'll be back in studio on Thursday. And Tom, good luck with your move. Congratulations.
Thank you, brother. Always good to be on, Mark.
Okay. All right, folks, that's it for today. See you on Thursday. Have a good day.